Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Cassandra, and if you are new here, please take a moment, hit that subscribe button because on this channel, we share new inspiration and DIYs on a budget. Okay everyone, so today I wanted to do something a little different. I'm not using the pill bottles today. We are going to upcycle some of that leftover wrapping paper, or at least the inserts. So I have chosen two different tubes here. One is smaller and one is bigger. And then I go ahead and I start off using the bigger one. The reason being is with this, I wanted to create a gnome boot that one could be used also as a baby doll boot. So you could use it for a gnome or you can use it to fit a baby doll's foot. So for the first part, I think I can show you better than I can describe it to you. I used the bigger tube and all I did was just cut it about 2 inches up. And you can kind of make this your own. I mean, you can make it bigger if you would like. This is just the measurements that I was working with. And it kind of just worked for what I wanted. And then on the smaller one, I only cut half of the smaller tube. And then I used that, I would say about 3.5 inches higher, well, 3.5 inches total. And then I just insert that to the back. That is going to be the back of the boot. Now, when you're gluing it on, I would suggest kind of putting it on a flat surface so that you know that the part that you just added to the smaller tube or the smaller circle is completely flush. It's going to make a big difference in our next steps. Now, taking again the bigger tube, I'm going to cut off another piece and I'm going to cut it in half. And basically what I'm doing is now is I'm just trying to create the front part of the shoe. So I just take it and my measurements were about an inch high. I don't want it to be, of course, as tall as the back of the boot, but you also don't want it to be too small. Keep in mind that we will be building onto the shoe, so you're going to give it a little bit more height. When you're cutting the pieces, I always cut them and then I cut them in half. That way I can get a straight cut. So I just lay them flat. You can always get the shape back if you would like to keep the shape, or you can just make the shape yourself to create that kind of rounded off edge in the front. Well, not an edge, but the rounded part in the front of the shoe. So I'm just using my big ruler here and I want to make sure that the piece is completely straight. That way, when I start building the actual boot, it doesn't seem lopsided or off. Now, if you notice that, and it probably will, if you notice that it kind of loses its shape, just grab that roll and kind of wrap it around it again and just kind of mold it back to the shape that you want. Now I'm going to be adding some masking tape. I could not find my regular masking tape, so I just went with the painter's tape. And the reason I do that is one, it kind of makes it a little bit stronger. And number two, when I actually go to glue it down to the sole, well, when I glue the sole to it, I think it kind of helps provide a little bit more substance so that there's actually something there other than just the cardboard. Okay, so the next step is we're going to grab either some cardboard or some foam board. Either way, it works perfectly fine. And then what I want you to do is pay attention to that gap that you have. Make sure that it's pointing down towards what's going to be the sole. Now, as you guys know, I do not always use a pattern. Most of the time, I just shape mine as I go. So I'm just going to create a rectangle before I do anything else. And then once again, before we glue anything down, I'm just going to add some painter's tape or masking tape, whichever one you have on hand, to the bottom of that part of the shoe. Okay, after we've glued the back piece on, now we're working on the front of the shoe. Now, you might want to actually kind of measure this again before you place it or glue it in place. You might have to make a couple trims. Like on mine, I did have to actually trim off some of it because it was a little too big. Because normally I would kind of close the circle and it would be a complete circle, but this one I only want a half circle. Now, this is also keeping in mind if you would like to use this as a baby doll boot. If you're just using this for the gnome, then you don't have to do that. I just thought it would be kind of cool to make something that you could use for both. Okay, so after you've glued it down, let it set for a little bit. Make sure it is completely in place and the glue has settled. Then the next step is, you guessed it, we're going to add some more masking or painter's tape. I just think that it kind of helps hold it together. I'm sorry, you know how they say duct tape fix everything? I think masking tape, when I'm making my little gnome boots, it's great. So now I just start trimming and creating the shape of the shoe that I want it to be. Now, if you find that you're cutting a little too close, you don't have to do that. It is not necessary. Just trim it and shape it the best you can. And then you can always go back in with sandpaper, as you'll see me do. And that also kind of helps gives it its shape, which I do that in most of my gnome shoes. I also use this little razor here, or what do you call it? A sharp knife. And I cut like a little, I wouldn't say a triangle, but kind of like a half moon shape on both sides, just to kind of create kind of that inner sole, kind of what you would see on a normal shoe. You don't have to, it could be completely straight. That's fine. It's just something that I like to do. And if you have any spots that you feel have kind of coming apart, just go back in with the hot glue gun and just make sure you glue and touch up the areas. Okay, now it's time to actually start building the top of the shoe. So I have a piece of felt here. I actually got these rolls from Dollar Tree. I've actually never seen them until recently, so I'm cutting that into a strip, and then I have some polyfill from, it's kind of just left over from one of my old pillows that I'm putting and upcycling the use of that as well. So you'll see that I did not put anything over top of the shoe, because I'm actually going to use this felt as kind of like the top. Now, you can always go in and add more masking tape across the top before you put the felt on, and it'll work just as fine, or just as good. But in my situation, I just decided to use some felt, and then I just measure it to go only across the top of the shoe. I'll glue that down, and then we'll go to the next step. And when you're gluing down the felt at the front of the shoe, because this is kind of just like me building it up, and this is not like the final front of my shoe, I do not want it to become too bulky. So what I've done is I've actually just taken the edges and I've cut kind of like I pulled the edges out and then I cut little slits so that I only have a little bit of material there. Not much, not enough to create any type of bulkiness or anything that would deform the front of my shoe. Okay, now this is where the polyfill or some type of stuffing comes into play. I'm only using a little bit. Now that little piece of felt that I had already laid down, that's my base. And now this is going to be like in between this felt and my next piece of felt. Now, when I originally started this shoe, I was going to use this pink or like purplish felt as my actual color for the shoe. And then as I got going, I actually decided to change my design midway. Not the design of like how I build the shoe, but like the actual design of the pattern of the shoe. So I just created another piece of felt. I cut out a strip and then I cut it the exact same way that I did the black, except I'm using this to actually hold the polyfill in place. You can skip this step if you're just using a material. It works the exact same way. And as you'll see in the next step, I actually ended up putting another piece of felt on top of it because I changed my color. Okay, so this is where, as you see, I decided to change the color. So I decided to go with this lighter blue. I just like the color of it better based off of the fur that I'm going to be using for the top of my little boot. So I just cut out another rectangle. This was the part that I was saying you do not have to have three pieces of felt. You really just need two, one as a base, then one to cover the polyfill and hold it in place, and then form the front of your shoe. Or you can use material like I normally do in most of my other videos. This one I wanted to be a little bit different just because I did not have the type of material or the colors that I wanted that went with the beautiful fur that I had found. Now it's time for my favorite part of all of my boots, adding my fur. Now I found this at Hobby Lobby and I used the coupon, plus they had a nice little deal going, so I only paid $1.25 for this. I just loved it, and I know my girls, they love unicorns, they love like the rainbow pattern. So all I'm gonna do is just cut a small strip. I cannot use all the color, so I chose to go ahead and just use the pink color. It's kind of like a cotton candy pink. And as you've seen in my other videos, if you've watched them, please be very careful with how you are cutting your fur. Do not cut all the way through. Slightly glide your X-Acto knife or blade across the back, making sure that you are not applying a lot of pressure. You're going to slide the blade and pull apart at the same time. That way you do not have a choppy look and you're going to get the look that you want. Right about now, you're probably wondering, okay, so is she going to cover the back of the boot? I am, and for some reason, I did not do this in the correct steps. So I actually had found this cute little, it's like a fabric, but it's like a shiny type of fabric, and it looks almost like, mermaid scales, I guess what I would compare it to. And I found it at Walmart and it was the little quarter sheet for I think it was 97 cents. So I decided to apply this to just the back of it. I didn't cut or cover the full area, just enough that would you could actually see from underneath of the fur if the fur was moved or just shining through. Now, you do not have to use fabric. You can use whatever fabric you are using. You don't have to do what I'm doing. Or if you went along and did like the felt that I used in the front, you can continue that to the back as well. Now, I think to kind of finish it off before I add the fur, I want to add a little bit of something around the base of the shoe, kind of to cover up any imperfections, anything that, might have not been cut evenly or just make it look a lot better. And this also makes it look like you have a thicker sole. So I found this little ribbon. I had got it a while back. I think I maybe paid 50 cents for it, and I found it at Dollar Tree. It's really thin, but it's shiny, and I thought it would be perfect for this little combo that I got going on. Okay, one more step before we add the fur. I decided that the end I wanted to add the illusion of a sock. So I have some like lilac felt and I'm just going to cut a small strip. Um, and then once I cut it, I'm going to actually fold it over and then just kind of give it the illusion of a sock at the top of my boot, kind of folded down. Again, this is something that is totally your preference. You do not have to do this step. I just liked the way it looked, so that's the only reason I did it. So you just put it on the inside of the top of the boot, and this way you can get a good measurement of how much you're actually going to need. And then you just glue it around the top with some of it sticking out, as you'll see. Okay, now it's time for the final step, which is my favorite step. I'm going to miss winter when it's over because I don't think I can use my fur boots anymore. So I'm going to try to push them out as much as I can because I absolutely love little fur boots. So now, as you see, we can go ahead and start adding our faux fur. Now you may have to make some final cuts and some final adjustments, which that is fine. Just remember again when you're cutting it, if you do have to, do not apply too much pressure when you're putting the blade through. Just glide over it and then pull apart. Before I started adding it, I didn't like the way the cut looked at the top, so I just added a very, very small bead of glue across the very top of it. And again, I folded that down so that it looked just more smoother and it just kind of blended in better. And then I just add the glue and then start adding the fur. One tip that I always like to suggest is that when you're adding fur, whether it's fur or material, make sure you're starting at the back. That way you end up again at the back. I just think that it gives it more of a cleaner finish. And if you have any imperfections, it's at the back, not in the front. So there they are. Aren't they just so stinking cute? I love them. I enjoyed making them. I hope that you guys enjoy making them too. I would love if you guys can give me some input or maybe upload some videos or photos, something, so I can see the crafts that you actually make from the videos that I create here. Please hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, happy crafting, y'all.